The UAW and Ford have reached a tentative deal, but the process is not over yet. Ford workers could reject it and send it back to negotiators. But now that Ford has that tentative deal, the pressure is on for Stellantis and General Motors. Today, the UAW met with both companies. Earlier this week, workers walked out of Stellantis' Sterling Heights assembly and GM's Arlington assembly plant down in Texas. Those are some of the company's biggest moneymakers. Meanwhile, during their quarterly review call, Ford said it will lose $1.4 billion in the third and fourth quarters. Joining me now to discuss all of this is Jeff Gilbert, auto reporter for WWJ News Radio 950, and Paul Eisenstein here in the studio, editor-in-chief of Headlight.News. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
So, Jeff, I will start with you. If you want to break down the details of the contract, what exactly did Ford get here in this record deal?
We'll learn a lot more later, but workers got about a 25% pay raise over 4 years, 11% the first year. They got job security provisions. They also got the right to strike if there is a plant closing during this time. And they got cost of living increases as well as improvements to their retirement pay.
Now, Paul, I'd love to know your thoughts on the deal and whether you think the members will ratify it. But also, you were on that Ford call we just mentioned earlier. Any thoughts on what you heard there?
Well, it's rather interesting. Ford did make some money up from a big loss last year, but they missed what Wall Street expected. Part of that was due to the strike. They lost about $100 million during just the third quarter. The big hit will be in the fourth quarter. They've got a lot of issues, and one of the things that they're struggling with is the reaction of the public to EVs. We're definitely getting pushback, Farley said, the CEO, Jim Farley, over the pricing of EVs. And the problem is we're going to see labor costs drive up EV prices, at least in the near term. Longer term, they're hoping that their second and third generation EVs will help them start to bring prices down to what consumers want to pay.
All right. EV is an issue for all of these automakers at this point. Jeff, in past negotiations, we have seen one big deal leads to another deal being made with other companies. But this situation is different considering all three companies were struck at the same time. So what do you expect going forward with GM and Stellantis?
Well, it's different, but I think the pattern part of it will be the same. Let's face it, a worker at General Motors is not going to vote to ratify a deal if they see a worker at Ford got a bigger pay raise. So the bigger economic issues are likely to be patterned at General Motors and Stellantis, but what's going to take time is tailoring them to the actual needs of these companies because they are different companies. But the basics are going to be generally the same.
And what do you expect in that process?
Yeah, I think Jeff is absolutely right. The basics will be there. You know, the old line, the devil's in the details, will be an important thing here. Will the other two companies, GM and Stellantis, agree on some of the critical issues? One of which is to give workers the right to strike over plant closings. We know that there's a major plant closing in Belvidere, Illinois, that the UAW is very strongly resisting. And one of the questions will be, will the contract that Stellantis eventually comes up with save that plant? GM has a couple plants that it may close, including Fairfax, Kansas. Will they, as part of this deal, give in a little bit there? But they will be different contracts after you get the top level earnings, wage structure and the like. There will be differences.
Sure. Jeff, a lot has been said during this entire process, especially from the UAW's point of view, that concessions were made back around the collapse years ago, and they wanted that made up to them. Is the ball kind of back in the automakers' court, Ford specifically, since they're the only ones with a tentative deal? Is that going to be a bargaining chip for Ford in a few years when it's time to do this again?
That's going to be interesting because the economy changes and we don't know what's going to be happening in 4 years. It's possible we could be in some sort of recession and Ford could come to the UAW looking for givebacks. It's just impossible to tell what's going to happen in four years. I mean, Paul and I have been around with a number of sets of negotiations over the years. We've seen generous contracts, we've seen concessionary contracts, and these things do tend to run in cycles.
Yeah, this is rather interesting. As we've noted, this is the most lucrative contract the UAW has had in 22 years. Some people would say it's the best contract that the union has gotten out of the automakers since the days of Walter Reuther, the UAW's founder. And it's a peculiar time period which worked out for the UAW in that you had all three companies earning lots of money. Yeah. It has made it easier, considering we had a strike that went 41 days at Ford and will now be in the 7th week. It's still easier for the union to get its demands met, at least in its favor, than it would have been in other times when at least one of the companies would have been struggling.
What kind of message, Paul, do you think all of this sends to the non-union auto workers in other parts of the country and those non-union automakers?
The last point is important. We have historically seen that the foreign-owned so-called transplant assembly lines, like Georgetown, Kentucky, where they build the Toyota Camry, have generally kept up within a few dollars on the wages and benefits of whatever the UAW negotiates here. They want to keep the workers happy and make them not feel like they're being cheated, so they always do up their costs. But, you know, it'll add up to maybe $1,000 of difference between the car built here versus one of the imports. And I think that'll happen again. The real difference could be at Tesla, which is about $20 an hour cheaper labor rates than the Detroit manufacturers and about $10 cheaper than what the transplants pay. This could be a breakthrough for Tesla.
Sure. Jeff, do you think this might add some momentum to attempts to unionize elsewhere in the auto industry?
Well, certainly the UAW says they want to move in that direction, but they've been working on that for many years. They came close with Volkswagen a couple of years ago. They, as Paul mentioned, Tesla, they've been in a tight struggle with Tesla, and Tesla has gone through a number of NLRB hearings and challenges, and I think there are a lot of cases that are still open there. And you have to also look at other foreign companies and other EV startups. Rivian is building a brand new plant in the south. You've got VinFast, a Vietnamese car maker that's building a plant in North Carolina. So you have all of these companies. The UAW would like to organize them, but they haven't won that first victory, and that's what they have to do to get some momentum, and that's going to be very difficult for them.
I think the best chance they have will likely be with Tesla. There's so much resentment there, and Elon Musk has created an environment which is not very friendly. They've had a lot of sex harassment, racial harassment, other issues that they could wind up, at least at the California plant, winning a vote.
All right. We'll see how the tide turns in the days to come. Jeff Gilbert joining us over Zoom from WWJ News Radio 950, and Paul Eisenstein here in the studio from Headlight.News. Thank you both for joining us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you.